They were supposed to spend 6 months on the International Space Station, but unexpected events intervened, doubling the length of their mission. Today, NASA's Frank Rubio and Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Petelin begin their journey home to wrap up the longest spaceflight in history by an American and the third longest spaceflight ever. Welcome to Mission Control in Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where flight controllers are working in concert with their Russian counterparts across the ocean at the Russian Mission Control Center as we prepare for the deorbit burn just 23 minutes from now of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft that will begin the final leg of a 371-day, 157-million-mile mission for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin. We're standing by for more word on all of the developments that will lead up to the deorbit burn in less than 23 minutes. It will be a 4-minute, 39-second burn, a retrograde maneuver, a braking maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit with its sights set on a remote landing site in south-central Kazakhstan, just about 90 miles southeast of the town of Dzhezkagan, Kazakhstan. You're looking at a balcony view from a balcony camera of the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow, where Russian flight controllers have been talking to the 3 crew members aboard the Soyuz spacecraft. We'll talk about undocking and all of the developments that have led up to this point in time and the return of these 3 crew members that you see in this picture. Sergei Prokopyev, the Soyuz commander, in the center seat of the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft. To his left and on the right of this picture is cosmonaut Dmitry Petelin, and on the left, NASA's Frank Rubio, who is the all-time record holder for the single longest spaceflight by an American astronaut. At the time of landing that is coming up at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time, this trio will have accrued 371 days in space, completing 5,936 orbits of the Earth, and as we mentioned, a mission spanning 157.4 million miles, roughly the equivalent of 328 round trips to the moon and back. Sergei Prokopyev, and this his second flight into space, will have accumulated 568 days in space, putting him 12th on the all-time list for most days in space by a human. Petelin and Rubio, of course, wrapping up their first mission in space and again aboard the International Space Station. Some 5.5 hours ago, the crew members departing the International Space Station gathered in the Prishal module attached to the multipurpose laboratory module, Naoka, on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station to bid a final farewell to Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin that you see in the background at the hatchway to their Soyuz spacecraft. The 10 crew members that was then, at that time, Expedition 69, gathered for final pictures before the 3 departing crew members floated inside the Soyuz spacecraft and hatches were closed. This hatch closed on the station side of the docking interface between the Soyuz and the International Space Station, followed a few minutes later by the closing of the hatch on the Soyuz side. There were leak checks conducted. The 3 crew members donned their Sokol launch and entry suits, conducted leak checks on those suits, and they were all set to depart the International Space Station. Communications and systems checks were also conducted with the Soyuz crew on board the MS-23 spacecraft before the undocking occurred. With all of the systems on the Soyuz spacecraft in good shape, the command was issued to open up the hooks holding the Soyuz in place to the Prishal module, And at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, the Soyuz departed the International Space Station as Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin left the complex that had been their home for more than a year. Within minutes after the undocking, two separation burns were conducted by the Soyuz engines to create an opening rate between the Soyuz and the International Space Station, allowing the Soyuz to move to a distance of some 24 miles away from the station where it currently resides, waiting for the final deorbit burn that is scheduled coming up at 5:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. The configuration of the International Space Station before the undocking showed the two Soyuz vehicles, as you see in this graphic, the MS-23, that Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin are on board. The MS-24 spacecraft that was parked alongside of MS-23 was the vehicle in which Oleg Kononenko, Nikolai Chub, and NASA's Laurel O'Hara launched on back on September 15th. Once the MS-23 undocked a few hours ago, it left just the Soyuz MS-24 that was docked to the Rosviet module on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. And at the time of undocking, Expedition 69 formally came to an end, and Expedition 70 began under the command of Andy Mogensen that you see in the front row in this crew portrait, along with NASA's Jasmine Mugbeli. From left to right, Nikolai Chub, Konstantin Borisov, Andy Mogensen, the new commander of the International Space Station, Oleg Kononenko, Jasmine Mugbeli, Satoshi Furukawa of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and NASA's Laurel O'Hara. So Expedition 70 now underway on board the International Space Station. The crew members on the station conducting some experiments and some housekeeping in the wake of the departure of Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin. Meanwhile, in Kazakhstan, which is the focus of attention, the NASA and Russian landing teams are about to take off from the airstrip in Dzhezkagan, the intermediary staging site for today's recovery operations. They will be taking off in Russian Mi-8 helicopters, making their way in about a 35-minute flight to the landing site in south-central Kazakhstan. They are also accompanied by all-terrain vehicles and an Antonov 26 fixed-wing aircraft that is serving today, as it always does for the Soyuz landings, as an airborne data and communications relay center, relaying data and voice from the crew once it approaches the landing site back to the Russian flight control team in Korolyov.
We assembled it successfully. Thank you. Good luck to you.
A few weeks ago, Frank Rubio, who is the new all-time record holder for the longest single spaceflight in U.S. history, had an opportunity for a brief chat with the former record holder, NASA astronaut Martin Vande Hei, whose record stay of 355 days in space was eclipsed back on September 11. Let's take a look at that quick conversation between Rubio and Vande Hei about tips that Vande Hei provided Rubio about today's entry and landing.
Since it's been a long time since your Soyuz instructors talked to you about landing and what to do, I'm going to remind you about a couple things that I might have made a mistake on. I succeeded with keeping my mouth shut when we hit the ground. That was a good thing, so I didn't bite my tongue off. And but make sure you do keep your head in the seat. You will have the strength to be able to lift your head off the seat. So when you're tempted towards the end to check how far above the ground you are, don't do that, because it might creep up and get you before you thought it was there, because you do hit just as hard as everybody says you do.
Yeah, the good thing about that is that I'll have some help, because I think my spine has extended just enough that I kind of am wedged into my seat liner, so I shouldn't move very much at all.
Frank Rubio, a medical doctor, and now the new record holder for the longest single space flight. Once the deorbit burn occurs, as you see in this animation, it will slow the Soyuz down by 128 feet per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit. The pyros will fire about 27 minutes later to separate the three sections of the Soyuz vehicle, the descent module that the crew is strapped in, ready for entry, the only piece of the Soyuz that survives with its heat shield pointed in the direction of travel. About 15 minutes before touchdown, parachutes will deploy from the Soyuz in a carefully choreographed sequence that will enable the Soyuz to gently sway toward the landing site in Kazakhstan. Just a few seconds before touchdown, the soft landing engines will fire in a final braking maneuver, and the Soyuz will have touchdown. Again, the touchdown point about 90 miles to the southeast of Dzhezkagan in a remote area on the steppe of Kazakhstan, where the Russian search and recovery forces comprising the Rosaviatsia Civil Patrol will be waiting along with RSC Energia personnel to begin the extraction of the crew from the Soyuz spacecraft. Once out of the spacecraft, the crew will be placed in reclining chairs, comfortable chairs, to enable them to have a few minutes to regain their equilibrium. They will be feeling the tug of gravity against their bodies for the first time in more than a year today. They will then be carried in those chairs to a nearby inflatable medical tent for medical exams and an opportunity to take their Sokol launch and entry suits off and get into more comfortable flight clothing. They will be then carried to three waiting helicopters, Mi-8s, Russian Mi-8 helicopters, for a 2-hour flight back to the staging city in Karaganda, Kazakhstan, where they will split up, Rubio boarding a NASA jet for a flight back to Houston, and the two cosmonauts, Prokopiev and Patelin, boarding a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft for their flight back to Star City, Russia, and their training base outside of Moscow. The latest weather reports from the landing site not quite as optimistic as they were earlier in the day. The temperature is hovering around the 70-degree mark Fahrenheit, but we're now looking at broken clouds at around 6,000 feet. There have been some rain showers in the area. We are hopeful, of course, of getting video of the Soyuz descending under the chute, but that will depend on the visibility and how close to the bullseye target the Soyuz actually arrives at, as to whether or not we're going to get any meaningful video of its descent under its parachute. Some of the milestones in terms of the times coming up as we approach the 10-minute mark before the deorbit burn is initiated. The deorbit burn again will begin at 5:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Central Time. It will last 4 minutes, 39 seconds in duration, slowing the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit. The module separation that will occur takes place some 27 minutes after the deorbit burn. That module separation that is initiated by pyros will separate the top section, the orbital module, the middle section, which is the descent module, where the crew is strapped into their seats, Prokopiev in the center seat, Patelin to his left, and Rubio to his right. The lower section, the instrumentation and propulsion module, will be separated and discarded as well. The descent module, again, the only portion of the Soyuz that survives the rigors of entry. Those rigors will first be felt at about 5:54 and 51 seconds a.m. Central Time as the three crew members reach the first traces of Earth's atmosphere. They will feel the first effects of Earth's gravity in more than a year at that point, as they then, just a few minutes later, enter into the plasma regime of peak heating, where temperatures around the spacecraft will rise to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That will last for about 5 minutes or so until they emerge from that section of the entry timeline. Maximum G loads on the crew will build up to about 4 to 5 Gs against their bodies before the command is sent to open up the parachutes at an altitude of 6.7 miles. That will occur at 6:03 and 13 seconds Central Time, 7:03 a.m. Eastern Time. This parachute deployment sequence is triggered by a pressure sensor at an altitude of 41,000 feet. At this point, the parachute cover is jettisoned by pyros and springs that pull out 2 extraction chutes, which in turn pulls out the drogue chute. That in turn pulls out the main chute. This all takes about 20 seconds to occur. Then at some 21,000 feet in altitude, another pressure sensor starts a timer that triggers the remaining events in the landing sequence. At 18,000 feet, commands will be issued to jettison the heat shield. That's about 3 minutes after parachute deploy. Those commands also inhibit the entry thrusters and opens valves to vent all of the hydrogen peroxide fuel for the entry thrusters and oxygen in the life support system tank. If we have video at that time, you'll see a white vapor. That is normal. That white vapor is a combination of hydrogen peroxide and oxygen venting into the air. The purpose of this is to safe the vehicle for landing so that the search and recovery forces that will be landing sequentially in their Russian Mi-8 helicopters after touchdown don't encounter any hazardous gases as they try to expedite the extraction of the crew from the Soyuz descent module.
Maneuver and turning off the fans of the HISA, cooling and drying equipment. Copy that, and please continue reporting your status to us. And the HISA.
This is Mission Control Houston, now just 7 minutes away from the deorbit burn, the initiation of the firing of the Soyuz engine that will last for 4 minutes and 39 seconds, slowing the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second. You'll hear call-outs from Soyuz commander Sergei Prokopyev. The Russian flight controllers of the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov will be calling the crew on Prokopiev's call sign, which is Altai. That's the call sign that you'll be hearing for the Soyuz spacecraft as the calls are made to the crew during the final phase of today's landing operations.
And on both inputs, you have to make the appropriate selection of the sensor and select lane E. On displays, control, monitoring, and maneuver.
The 3 crew members are coming home in the Soyuz MS-23 that was launched in February as a replacement vehicle for the damaged Soyuz MS-22 that Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin launched on over a year ago in September of 2022. That vehicle was damaged on December 14th when it incurred a leak in its coolant system through its radiator. The coolant was depleted, thus rendering that Soyuz MS-22 unusable for the return of the crew. The Soyuz MS-23 was launched in February unpiloted, made an automated docking to the Prishal module on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. The MS-22 was then undocked without the crew on board and returned to Earth for a landing in Kazakhstan in the same vicinity that these 3 crew members will be returning for a touchdown a little less than 1 hour from now. It was that coolant leak on the Soyuz MS-22 that resulted in the extension of the mission by Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin from 6 months to the mission that is coming to a conclusion today, 371 days, 157 million miles. Again, Rubio comes home with the longest single spaceflight in U.S. history, and this becomes the third longest spaceflight ever, behind Valery Polyakov's 438-day mission to the Mir space station, followed by Sergei Avdeyev's Mir mission of 380 days. Less than 3 minutes now until the initiation of the deorbit burn. At the time of the deorbit burn, the Russian Mi-8 helicopters with the NASA Russian landing team will be taking off in sequential fashion from the airstrip in Dzhezkagan, the intermediary staging site for tonight's landing operations. An Antonov 26 fixed-wing aircraft will also be in the area. This airborne fleet will be conducting a racetrack pattern, flying around the landing zone, awaiting the arrival of the Soyuz vehicle. And immediately after touchdown, those helicopters will begin landing in sequential fashion to enable the recovery teams that are comprised of Rosaviatsa, the Civil Air Patrol Agency, as well as RSC Energia, to approach the spacecraft, make sure there are no toxic gases emanating from the Soyuz vehicle so that they can begin the process of opening up the hatch and extracting the crew. "90 seconds away now from the initiation of the deorbit burn.
Минута до включения двигателя.
1 minute to engine activation and BIOS power is on. Copy.
Russian flight controllers now intently watching their data, 30 seconds away from the start of the deorbit burn.
Recommend. Inaudible.
Standing by for the beginning of the deorbit burn.
Thruster activated at 13:24.
And the confirmation has been received that the deorbit burn is underway. This will last 4 minutes and 39 seconds. We'll be getting reports from Sergei Prokopyev on the progress of this burn that will slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second and begin the journey home for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Patelin.
We have 13.3 in 13 seconds. 2 kilograms so far. And delta V increasing. Parameters are normal.
Good reports so far on the progress of the burn.
Two minutes, and we now have 27 decimal inaudible.
Everything looking good 1 minute into the burn. Three minutes left in the deorbit burn. Everything proceeding as planned.
KDU combined propulsion system parameters are nominal. Pressure in the oxidizer line inaudible. Pressure in the fuel line.
2 minutes, 10 seconds into the burn. Change in velocity and all of the engine pressures looking good.
Parameters are nominal.
Three minutes into the burn, about another minute and a half.
Pressure in the spherical tank is inaudible.
3.5 minutes into the burn, just about 1 minute left.
95 meters in 30 seconds, and the KDU combined propulsion system parameters are nominal.
Отработали 4 минуты.
4 minutes into the burn. Everything is right down the money.
157 kilograms of propellant. And pressure in the spherical tanks is 81 in number 2.
About 15 seconds left. And the deorbit burn is complete and perfectly normal. 4 minutes, 39-second braking maneuver. The Soyuz now is on its way home with Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, and Dmitry Petelin on board. Their journey coming to an end. Touchdown scheduled about 48 minutes from now.
Открытый забор, да?
Is this KDU open? Pressure.
The next milestone on the road home will be the module separation that is scheduled at 5:51 and 58 seconds a.m. Central Time. The pyrotechnic separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz. just to recap, the Soyuz MS-23 on its way home following the deorbit burn that was just completed successfully. Perfect timing, good pressure, good deceleration of the Soyuz, enabling it to begin to slide back out of orbit into the Earth's atmosphere. This coming in the wake of the undocking of the Soyuz from the Prishal module earlier this morning at 2:54 a.m. Central Time, 3:54 a.m. Eastern Time. And again, in this animation, you'll see the next event. There is the module separation that will occur pyrotechnically. The descent module, where the crew is located, will enter the Earth's atmosphere. Temperatures around the spacecraft will build to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, heading toward the landing site in Kazakhstan. A series of events will deploy a drogue chute and then a main parachute about 15 minutes before touchdown. The chute deployment sequence will occur, setting the stage for the firing of the soft landing engine just about 1 or 2 seconds before touchdown. That is planned to be about 90 miles to the southeast of the town of Dzhezkagan. The Russian Mi-8 helicopters are airborne now, heading for the landing site, which is about a 35-minute flight. They will arrive in a circular racetrack pattern around the landing site that you see there, at the bullseye mark, moving from southwest to northeast, passing just south of Baikonur, the cosmodrome where the Soyuz launches take place. Most recently, Laurel O'Hara launching with Oleg Kononenko and Nikolai Chub on the Soyuz MS-24 spacecraft. They're now part, of course, of Expedition 70. The weather at the landing site right now is showing broken clouds at about 6,000 feet, light winds, temperature around 69 degrees Fahrenheit, and some rain showers in the area. So it is questionable as to what our visibility will be of the spacecraft descending under the parachute. We'll stand by, of course, and as soon as we have video from the landing site, we'll bring it to you. We're about 44 minutes away from touchdown. Once the spacecraft does touch down, the search and recovery forces will land in sequential fashion in those Russian Mi-8 helicopters. The most critical personnel, the RSC Energia personnel, and the search and recovery forces will make their way to the spacecraft and begin the process of opening up the hatch and extracting the crew one by one, placing them in nearby chairs alongside their vehicle. They'll have a few minutes to gain some equilibrium, feeling the effects of gravity for the first time in more than a year, before they're carried in those chairs into a nearby inflatable medical tent so that their Sokol launch and entry suits can be removed. They'll receive initial medical exams and be put in more comfortable flight clothing for the subsequent 2-hour helicopter flight back to the staging city of Karaganda.
Copy. I'll give you the time in a second. Okay, main engine cut off, command 132847. Copy. How copy? Yes, copy. Our specialists are working.
One thing that we'll note here, in about 8 minutes, as the Soyuz moves to a distance of about 87 miles away from the International Space Station on its descent towards the beginning of the traceable senses of Earth's atmosphere, that will end our guaranteed voice communication with the Soyuz through a relay to the International Space Station itself. That VHF relay still in place and being heard, of course, by the Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow. So Starting at about 5:42, the communications from the Soyuz will be a bit choppy. We may lose comm for a while, especially as the Soyuz descends into the peak heating regime for about 5 minutes. That peak heating regime will begin at about 5:56 a.m. Central Time. Often communications is lost for several minutes until the Soyuz emerges from that plasma regime that builds up that ionization around the spacecraft itself. At that point, the Soyuz will begin to approach the area where voice communication will be established with the Antonov fixed-wing aircraft that is flying in the vicinity of the landing site to relay data from the spacecraft as well as voice back to the Russian flight control team in Korolyov. Three countdown clocks here in Mission Control are ticking backward towards major events that are upcoming. The separation of the three sections of the Soyuz about 14.5 minutes from now. The opening of the parachutes some 25.5 minutes from now. Landing now just under 40 minutes southeast of Dzhezkagan, Kazakhstan. In addition, right after the completion of the deorbit burn, the orbital module, the top section of the Soyuz spacecraft, the three-section Soyuz spacecraft, it was depressurized about 10 seconds after the conclusion of the deorbit burn, setting the stage for the module separation that's coming up. The precise landing coordinates being relayed to the crew on board the Soyuz. The current projection by the ballistics officers for the RSC Energia team at the Russian Mission Control Center shows the landing site at 47.20 degrees north, 69.39 degrees east. That is where the search and recovery forces will be positioned to greet the Soyuz crew following touchdown, which occurs now 38.5 minutes from now. "12 minutes until module separation, the next major milestone en route home for Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, and Dmitry Petelin. This trio was launched on September 21st, 2022 on the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft that ultimately was damaged, losing its cooling capability through a coolant leak in its radiator, and was rendered unusable for the safe return of the crew. The replacement craft that is coming home today, the Soyuz MS-23, was launched in February, unpiloted, And the Soyuz MS-22 was undocked and deorbited for a landing in Kazakhstan unpiloted. The coolant leak resulted in the extension of the mission by Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin that is coming to a close today after 371 days, the third longest spaceflight in human spaceflight history. The Russian Mi-8 helicopters are some 20 minutes out from the landing site, having taken off from the airstrip in Dzhezkagan en route to the touchdown point, which is about 90 miles to the southeast of Dzhezkazgan. Those helicopters left Karaganda earlier this morning, several hours ago, flew 2 hours to Dzhezkazgan to refuel, and now are en route to the landing site to begin the recovery of the 3 crew members. And we've reached the point where the Soyuz is far enough away now from the International Space Station that the voice communications relay capability through the station is no longer available or should not be available, so communications may be a bit sporadic and choppy from this point on through the descent through the Earth's atmosphere. 9 minutes until module separation. All of the events leading up to this point in today's return of Rubio, Prokopiev, and Petelin have gone by the book. The undocking that occurred earlier today at 2:54 a.m. Central Time, 3:54 a.m. Eastern. 2 separation burns of the Soyuz engine enabled the Soyuz to back away from the station and accelerate its departure rate from the complex for the deorbit burn that occurred a short time ago. That was a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde maneuver, slowing the Soyuz down by 128 feet per second, enabling it to begin its descent back to Earth. We're less than 7.5 minutes away now from the next milestone. That will be the pyrotechnic separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz, discarding the orbital module and the instrumentation and propulsion module, leaving just the descent module with the 3 crew members strapped inside. Sergei Prokopiev, the Soyuz commander, in the center seat, flanked to his left by Dmitry Petelin, and to his right by Frank Rubio. Again, voice communications not possible again through the relay from the International Space Station from the Soyuz spacecraft at this moment. The Soyuz now too far away from the station to provide that relay. This is normal. Everything is proceeding on track, coming up on the 5-minute mark until module separation. Just to recap, the module separation is scheduled just a few seconds before 5:52 a.m. Central Time, 6:52 Eastern. That will be followed about 3 minutes later by entry interface at an altitude of 62 miles. The first tug of gravity against the 3 crew members' bodies in over a year at that point as they begin the plunge back into the atmosphere. Some 2 minutes after that, they'll entry into plasma, where the peak heating around the spacecraft will begin. Temperatures around the Soyuz will build to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat shield in the direction of travel for the descent module. As it ablates or repels that heat, there will be an orange fireball, if you will, around the spacecraft. This is typical for returning space vehicles coming through the atmosphere at their high rate of speed. This will be about a 3-minute regime in the plasma for the 3 crew members. Once they emerge from that, G loads or the G forces against their bodies will build to about 4 to 5 Gs just after 6 a.m. Central Time. The command to open chutes will be initiated at 6:03 and 13 seconds a.m. Central Time, 7:03 a.m. Eastern Time. Again, that parachute deployment sequence triggered by a pressure sensor at 41,000 feet. The main parachute cover will be jettisoned by pyros and springs, pulling out 2 extraction chutes, which in turn will pull out the drogue chute, and in turn pulls out a main chute, about 20 seconds for all of that to happen. At an altitude of 21,000 feet, another pressure sensor starts a timer that initiates all of the remaining events in the landing sequence. At 18,000 feet, commands will be issued to jettison the heat shield. That's about 3 minutes after chute deploy. Those commands inhibit the entry thrusters and open valves to vent hydrogen peroxide fuel for the entry thrusters and oxygen that is in the life support system tank. If we have video at that time, we'll see whether we will or not, but there will be a white vapor. That's normal. That's a combination of hydrogen peroxide and oxygen venting into the air to safe the vehicle for landing so that no hazardous gases are present when the search and recovery forces land in their Russian Mi-8 helicopters to begin the process of opening up the hatch to the Soyuz and extracting the crew. We should be about 30 seconds or so away from module separation. We'll be standing by for that confirmation. And now reports having been received from the Russian Mission Control Center of a nominal separation of the three sections of the Soyuz. Module separation is now complete. That all went by the book. The next milestone about 3 minutes from now, and that will be the Soyuz hitting the top of the Earth's atmosphere.
Huntsville Station on 2 for OCT2.
The Russian Mi-8 helicopters, part of the Rosaviatsa search and recovery forces, are nearing the landing site southeast of Dzhezkazgan to move into a racetrack pattern, an oval-shaped pattern around the landing zone, awaiting the arrival of the Soyuz spacecraft, with touchdown scheduled about 23.5 minutes from now. Flight controllers in Korolyov outside Moscow receiving data from the Soyuz spacecraft through their communication satellites, the Luch system. The Soyuz now has entered the Earth's atmosphere. The three crew members feeling the first effects of gravity on their bodies in 371 days. Just over 8 minutes until the scheduled deployment of the parachutes. The Soyuz currently descending through the Earth's atmosphere, 6.5 minutes to go until the commands will be sent to begin the parachute deployment sequence. As expected, we are not receiving voice communication from the crew. This is typical at this point of the entry sequence. Once the spacecraft passes through the plasma regime, the period of peak heating, we should be hearing from the crew once again, with communications relayed through the Antonov 26 fixed-wing aircraft in the vicinity of the landing site. You're looking at a view from balcony camera in the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow, their International Space Station Flight Control Room. All is quiet here at Mission Control in Houston as flight controllers belonging to the Orbit 1 team continue to watch over the International Space Station and follow developments on the Soyuz's descent for its touchdown in south-central Kazakhstan. Landing is scheduled just over 19 minutes from now. As we approach the top of the hour, we'll be standing by for confirmation of a chute deploy that is scheduled just over 3.5 minutes from now. The Soyuz should be emerging from that plasma regime any minute. Standing by for the emergence of the Soyuz from that plasma regime. This is the point where the crew is experiencing maximum G loads on their bodies of about 4 to 5 Gs. And there is that familiar beacon signal coming from the Soyuz MS-23.
A report on maximum G. We have 4.4 maximum G load. Copy.
Integral plus 18.
Integral
Индекс кривой.
+18. The index is along the curve.
Режим АУС.
Mode is automatic descent.
Sergei Prokopiev, the Soyuz commander, reporting that everything is in great shape on board the Soyuz. The crew experiencing those maximum G loads, but they are through the plasma regime as we stand by just over a minute from now for shoot deploy.
Notable and G-load is decreasing.
Good communication now being received from the Soyuz MS-23.
Integer, please report if you read me. Yes? And how are you feeling? We are feeling great. Thank you. End of control. Integer is +18.
Индексов где-то +0,1.
Index positive +1. Copy.
Sergei Prokopiev reporting that the crew is feeling well. Great news as the Soyuz MS-23 approaches its landing site in Kazakhstan. Touchdown expected less than 14.5 minutes from now. We should be getting confirmation momentarily on the opening of the chutes. The Russian Mi-8 helicopters, a part of the search and recovery forces, are approaching on station in the landing zone around where the Soyuz will touch down 13.5 minutes from now. We should be getting confirmation momentarily on shoot deploy. Twelve and a half minutes until touchdown. Still awaiting confirmation from the search and recovery forces that they have the Soyuz in sight under its parachute. We now have confirmation that the Soyuz parachute has been deployed. Once again, the Soyuz MS-23 is now descending toward its landing. Just about 11 minutes from now, its parachute has deployed. The crew is feeling well, according to Sergei Prokopiev, the Soyuz commander. All of the entry events have gone by the book to this point. The skies are quite overcast at the landing site. Temperatures around 69 degrees. We're still waiting for video from the landing site. But the Soyuz has deployed its parachute, and everything is continuing to go as planned for an on-time touchdown just about 9 minutes and 40 seconds from now. The search and recovery forces at the landing site now confirm that they have the Soyuz in sight under its parachute. All of the events to this point have been a winner. Everything has gone according to schedule, and the crew, according to Sergei Prokopiev, the Soyuz commander, is feeling well. Just 8.5 minutes until touchdown. Now about 7 minutes until touchdown. Everything continuing on course. The chutes have been deployed for the Soyuz MS-23. It is gently descending under its large orange and white parachute. Search and recovery forces have the vehicle in sight. The Russian Mi-8 helicopters are circling the landing zone waiting for touchdown, at which point they will descend and land in sequential fashion to begin the process of arriving at the capsule and extracting the crew. And there's our first view of the Soyuz MS-23 under the chutes. 6 minutes until touchdown. This video is courtesy of Roscosmos. Soyuz descending at its normal rate of descent. Search and recovery forces are reporting back that everything is looking good from their perspective. There were some rain showers in the area earlier today. The Soyuz descending under a deck, several decks of broken clouds, toward its touchdown point about 90 miles to the southeast of Dzhezkagan. Again, this video courtesy of Roscosmos from the landing site.
Inaudible.
Less than 5 minutes to go until touchdown. The extended mission of Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, and Dmitry Petelin is now in the home stretch. Once again, you're looking at the return of Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, and Dmitry Petelin after more than a year in space. Less than 4 minutes from touchdown on the desolate steppe of Kazakhstan. The parachutes deployed as planned at 6:03 a.m. Central Time. 3 minutes later, the Soyuz heat shield was jettisoned.
409. Confirm.
The next event will be just a second or two before touchdown. That'll be the firing of the soft landing engine. 6 engines fire to slow the Soyuz descent rate to just 1.5 meters per second.
Recovery here. How do you read it? Inaudible. We observe you. We have a visual. How do you read us here? 495, 553.
Search and recovery forces communicating directly now with Sergei Prokopiev, saying that they have a good visual on the spacecraft. Just over 2 minutes until touchdown.
It has been 1,000 meters. We are not able to connect with them in audio yet. We can hear them, they are not hear us yet. It has been 1,000 meters. We hear them, they are not.
Less than 1,000 meters from touchdown.
So we are looking for the 20th and 52nd minute. Plus 9 atmospheric bias. Plus 18 index point 1. The crew is feeling well.
Sergei Prokopiev continuing to provide reports back to the search and recovery forces, indicating that the crew is doing well. Just over a minute until touchdown.
The crew is doing well. Let them know. Cosmos 9549. For your information, the object has passed 500 meters and feeling well. 690 is out.
The search and recovery helicopters are circling the landing zone. We might see one of those helicopters come into view shortly, as the Soyuz is less than 500 meters off the ground.
We have come with the crew and they're feeling well. Prepare 100 meters to ground.
100 meters to go, the crew being told to brace for touchdown.
Object getting close to touchdown. Object
touchdown. Touchdown confirmed at 6:17 a.m. Central Time. Rubio's record ride comes to an end as he, Prokopiev, and Petelin return to Earth after a 371-day, 157-million-mile journey at the International Space Station. The third longest flight ever in human spaceflight history is over with a pinpoint landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan.
Altai, Search and recovery here, how do you read? Okay, all good.
Once again, Soyuz MS-23 has landed on the steppe of Kazakhstan. A bullseye touchdown for the three crew members, Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, and Dmitry Petelin.
409, how do you read? 249.
Landing occurring as planned at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:17 p.m. at the landing site that you're seeing right now in our live view.
I believe so. Let it get a bit.
About an hour and 53 minutes before sunset.
— 952 is on the ground.
The Russian Mi-8 helicopters are now descending in sequential fashion to arrive in the vicinity of the spacecraft. You can see one of those helicopters in view. The all-terrain vehicles will be moving toward the spacecraft as well, repositioning themselves to enable us to get video of the recovery process, the extraction of the crew, and the crew will be placed in reclining chairs next to the Soyuz MS-23 for a few minutes to regain their equilibrium before they're carried in those chairs to a nearby inflatable medical tent where they will doff their Sokol launch and entry suits, get into more comfortable flight clothing, and then make their way with the assistance of recovery personnel to 3 helicopters, one for each crew member, for a 2-hour flight back to the staging city of Karaganda.
K1, K2.
At that point, Rubio and his 2 crewmates will split up. Rubio will board a NASA jet to fly back to Houston. Prokopiev and Petelin will board a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft to fly back to their training base at Star City, Russia, outside of Moscow.
On 77, I will circle one more time. Okay. Go a little bit further, 49.
In this view, you can see Russian Mi-8 helicopters landing in the vicinity of the spacecraft that's just out of the field of view. The all-terrain vehicle that carries this television equipment that you saw the landing from will be repositioning itself a short time from now and make its way to the Soyuz as it documents for us. And hopefully we will be seeing the extraction of the crew and the crew being placed in those reclining chairs by the capsule.
(178) landing in its place.
At the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow, the Russian words "Есть посадка," they've landed, and a greeting welcoming Frank Rubio back after his record-setting mission for an American astronaut of 371 days in space.
For 09, checking coordinates. 47 degrees, 16 minutes, 47 seconds. 1 minute, 39 seconds. This is 240. Following 49.
This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, you're looking at video from the landing site in Kazakhstan, where the Soyuz MS-23 touched down just 9 minutes ago. The Russian Mi-8 helicopters have landed in the vicinity of the spacecraft. They will soon approach the spacecraft to begin the process of opening up the hatch and extracting the crew. Touchdown occurred right on time at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time.
24 bags. 95 4 09. Object is close by.
This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, the greeting on the front screen of the Russian Mission Control Center, welcoming home Sergei Prokopyev, Dmitry Petelin, and Frank Rubio after their 371-day mission. Touchdown occurred about 13 minutes ago at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time. It was a pinpoint return for the crew, landing just as planned about 90 miles southeast of the town of Dzhezkagan. The Russian search and recovery forces, the Russian Mi-8 helicopters, have landed to begin the process of extracting the crew from the Soyuz. All of the events beginning with hatch closure late last night Central Time, followed by the undocking of the Soyuz from the International Space Station's Prishal module at 2:54 a.m. Central Time this morning, and the deorbit burn that occurred several hours later. All of those events went by the book. No issues whatsoever. Sergei Prokopyev reporting to the search and recovery forces in the final minutes before touchdown that the crew was feeling well and ready for their return to Earth. This is Mission Control in Houston. We're still awaiting for video from the spacecraft at the landing site. The search and recovery forces are there. They are beginning the work to extract the crew from the spacecraft. So far, we do not have video alongside the spacecraft itself. The video resources at the landing site have to be repositioned from where they were to show us the touchdown that occurred about 18 minutes ago. And this video now, courtesy of Roscosmos, showing Soyuz commander Sergei Prokopyev having been helped out of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft. Once again, this video courtesy of Roscosmos. Sergei Prokopyev, who was strapped into the center seat of the descent module of the Soyuz spacecraft, always the first out. He'll be followed by his two crewmates here shortly. Touchdown occurred just 20 minutes ago at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:17 p.m. at the landing site. The crew home after 371 days in space, the third longest space flight in history, and of course for Frank Rubio, the longest single space flight by an American astronaut.
Did you realize that we are finally on the ground? It has been more than a year. Well, the result is the main thing. Just perfect, just ideal. That the overload was 4.5, greater than last time. So wet. I'll take care of you. All good. I'll just stay here, take care of you too. Don't turn, just stay where you are. Don't jump. And we have seen all your greetings on Air Force anniversary. Yes, and we also worked with the veterans of soccer teams here. Exactly. He has not changed at all. You look the same as when we were sending you off to space. So the data is ready.
Prokopyev exchanging greetings with Some of the members of the search and recovery forces happy to see him for the first time in over a year. And from the view we just had, it appeared as if the Soyuz was pulled over onto its side,
Congratulations.
as opposed to being upright.
Thank you. Easy, easy. Check the arm. Check the cables. Careful. Easy.
Frank Rubio, the U.S. record holder for the longest single space flight in history, back on Earth.
Here you are. Don't fall. Very nice to see you. So great. We're all here. All went well. All the tasks completed. So we performed all the program and performed additional tasks.
Field test?
What about the field test? No, we're not going to have a field test now, but tomorrow we'll have a Sozvezdia constellation experiment that is going to be an interesting experiment on controlling manual descent. Thank you.
Here, finishes that up,
Your foot this way.
Hello, Frank.
Great, thank you.
Great.
It's good to be back.
You were the doctor on the crew, mate. How is in the space? How is your mate?
Fantastic. Yeah, everybody did really well.
You look very well.
Thank
very
you.
Well.
Thank you. It's good to be home. Thank you. It's good to be home.
Thank you.
Once again, the view from the landing site, right by the Soyuz MS-23. Frank Rubio on the left, Sergei Prokopiev on the right.
Check the arm on the right side.
And Dmitry Petelin now being removed from the Soyuz spacecraft.
Easy, easy here. Turn. Legs. Turn back. Remove cables. Little higher. Move him a bit higher.
Frank Rubio receiving congratulations there from Joel Montalbano, the International Space Station Program Manager, who along with NASA's Chief Astronaut Joe Acaba, part of the NASA team on site.
Sergey?
And a view of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft that touched down 28 minutes ago at 6:17 a.m. Central Time.
Yeah, drink a little bit. Hold it. Everything is in due time. We're here in the steppe of Kazakhstan.
Sergei Prokopyev, the commander of Expedition 69 and the Soyuz commander for the landing today, comes home after 2 flights in space and a total of 568 days, putting him 12th on the all-time list for most days in space by a human being. And there are technicians who are gathering up the parachute that deployed about 15 minutes before touchdown.
Still a bit dirty, that happens. All good. Do you want me to comb your hair?
Меня слышно? Слышно меня сейчас? Конечно. Ну я открываю, идет. Я просто когда начал колдать. Палатки вылез. Пораньше. После функции. А также фильмочек только да? Нормально, ничего даже не было. Такое.
So you had it was a bump, so did feel it.
This is Mission Control Houston, continuing to receive video from the landing site in south-central Kazakhstan. On the right, Sergei Prokopyev, the Soyuz commander and the commander of Expedition 69, which came to an end with the undocking of the Soyuz MS-23 this morning at 2:54 a.m. Central Time, 3:54 a.m. Eastern Time. Expedition 70 began. Prokopyev handing over command of the International Space Station to European Space Agency astronaut Andy Mogensen. Expedition 70 now well underway and will continue through the course of the fall time frame until Mogensen returns to Earth next spring with Crew 7.
At about 300 meters, CAM was established again. At that time, we also acquired visual. All normal, all good. Did you see us at the main chute? Yes, at about 800 we saw you already. You were not responding well, but we were able to see you already. All great, all normal. Good numbers. 140 to 90. Don't scream over there.
Да, слышно? Ты сунул рацию,
The next step for the 3 returning crew members, they'll be, as you look at the all-terrain vehicles that are on site, the 3 crew members will be carried in those chairs into a nearby inflatable medical tent to doff their Sokol launch and entry suits, get into more comfortable flight clothing, and then they'll be transported in those ATVs to 3 awaiting Russian Mi-8 helicopters to take off for a 2-hour flight back to the staging city of Karaganda to the northeast of the landing site.
Soyuz didn't get any bigger. Oh, really?
And maybe you want some pickles. Oh yeah. Maybe some succulent pork. That would be nice. Well, not right now, in about a week. So then at the tent, we will talk to you guys, okay?
The landing occurred about an hour and 53 minutes before sunset at the landing site. You can see the sun beginning to fade on the horizon. On the left in the left side of your screen is Dr. Joe Schmidt, who is Rubio's attending flight surgeon, and on the right is the NASA nurse Yana Shelopova.
And then once we got all back up, I couldn't reach him. So, I'd rather not be. I mean, it doesn't feel terrible.
Okay, they're bringing the watermelon for you. Make sure you clean it from the seeds. Okay, good. Good evening. I am the commander of the search and recovery helicopter. So my apologies if we had to wait a little bit. But from all of us, we would like to give you this, the fruit of the earth. Oh, I can smell it now. Thank you. Sergey.
And Dmitry Patelin, who was board engineer number 1, he and Prokopiev conducted 6 spacewalks during their time on board the International Space Station.
As they should have. What did you bring from space? Good mood. And in my personal items, I had all the rings and crosses that I took with me. This is something green. I forgot what it feels like. I did request the watermelon in advance, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Let's move it a little bit closer. Closer to the center.
Дмитрий, что больше всего ждали? Год.
Dmitry, you've been there for a year. Yes, actually, I was expecting to be here half a year before, and we've been waiting impatiently to get back. And it was my first landing. I didn't know what to expect exactly. Today I felt it to the fullest. the loads and gravity. What did you bring to your daughters from space? I brought souvenirs, photos, images that were brought to me by a Progress vehicle. Are you going to follow some experiments right now as you returned as an operator? We are planning constellation Suzvezdi experiments, that is with a suit and using the arm, but it will depend on physically is possible. Thank you very much.
The crew members being presented with fruit at the landing site
For you.
and Matryoshka dolls.
We can open it. Dmitry. For you. That is a heavy one. A heavy wooden doll, Matryoshka. Thank you. And greetings to Kustanai friends. Now pilots. For a photo, they stand in the back.
Those Matryoshka dolls bearing the images of each of the three crew members being presented to them by members of the search and recovery forces.
I'm taking pictures of everybody. All perfect. Very good.
The Soyuz landed 40 minutes ago at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:17 p.m. at the landing site. The crew was quickly extracted, placed in these reclining chairs for an opportunity to regain their equilibrium. They'll be carried in those chairs a short time from now into a nearby inflatable medical tent, where they will doff their Sokol launch and entry suits, get into more comfortable flight clothing, receive medical exams, and then be flown on three individual helicopters 2 hours to the staging city in Karaganda, Kazakhstan, where they'll split up. Rubio boarding a NASA jet to fly back to Houston. Prokopiev and Patelin boarding a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft to fly back to their home base, their training base at Star City, Russia.
Pick up the blanket.
Prokopiev, thumbs up, being moved toward that medical tent.
Hooray! Welcome. Welcome back.
So with that, the three crew members being brought into the medical tent at the landing site following their pinpoint touchdown to complete a 371-day, 157-million-mile mission, the longest space flight by an American astronaut, Frank Rubio, the third longest space flight in history. As we mentioned, the crew members were quickly extracted from the Soyuz MS-23 that landed on time, on target, and are now being brought into the nearby medical tent. And there's a view of Frank Rubio with Joe Acaba and the rest of the NASA team helping bring him into the medical tent. In the back, you see ISS program manager Joel Montalbano. The crew will get out of those Sokol launch and entry suits. They'll put on comfortable flight clothing and prepare for their helicopter flight back to Karaganda, Kazakhstan, and eventually their trip back to their respective hometowns. Rubio coming to Houston, Prokopiev and Petelin coming to Star City, Russia. So with that, the crew is now back in the medical tent. Medical exams in store for them as they have landed after more than a year in space, the third longest space flight in history, a successful end to an eventful mission that was extended by 6 months, but ended in great fashion with a bullseye touchdown on the steppe of Kazakhstan. Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, Dmitry Petelin, safely back on Earth. With that, we'll wrap up our coverage for tonight and this morning. We thank you for joining us throughout the night. Stay tuned for more to come on the ventures of the Expedition 70 crew aboard the International Space Station. But for now, we'll bid you a good morning from Mission Control in Houston.